Did I do it?
Yes, I am. And since you're all on early, you can make sure that you can hear me okay.
Yeah,
For
fine.
a few people who are on camera, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can do that.
All right, thank you.
Great. What about the Fred? Fred? Okay. Fred, are you there? I think I make him as.
Hello.
Hey, Fred. Yes, I see you. I hear your voice. It's great. It looks so great. Okay, Fred, very good. I look forward to hearing your stories. And so the Brian, can you? So is that Brian there? I make the Brian as a co-host as well.
Great. Brian says he is all set. Folks,
All
Brian
set.
is my husband, and he does all
Okay.
wonderful tech support for us.
Wonderful.
He's in the
Thank
same
you so
room as
much.
me.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's the program, not individual. It's the whole family, support, backup, Yes, this program, has become possible, without the great efforts of Julia, the author of the book, Painting Resilience, Fred Terna, artist, a Holocaust survivor, and the Ira, right, the father of the Julia, who gave an extremely grateful help and support, as well as the husband of Julia. It's like a family, the efforts, to work together. And so, and I'm a host of this event. I work for Brooklyn Public Library. This is the event hosted by the Brooklyn Public Library. It's the author talk. It is also the artist talk. So it's going to be great. That's why on the registration, we see so many people, coming, joining, and even more people will, even without registration, would join us from the friends, they pass over the link, they directly hit the link and to join us. So right now, let me check. We have 62 people, so as we talk, we're still a couple of minutes away, from and 3 o'clock. So maybe we are just a few minutes after 3 because I really want more people to come in and not miss anything. But of course, we cannot wait too long, so let's just be patient. Now, as you are waiting, I'm going to just share with you the music that has been repeated a couple of times. But for those new people that just latecomers, I really want them to hear this music to get some idea, right?
Okay. Frank?
Yes, I'm here.
Can I share that?
Okay, go ahead.
That way it won't be cut off, but you have to turn my screen sharing on.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I'm going to turn the screen sharing on. And let me see where the music, I think this is the one. Let me see, where is it? On the, where's the sharing? So I'm looking for, what is it? Just give me 1 minute. Because it's a new share. Let me see which is the music. Sometimes it's not easy to find it.
Okay, well, then you can just turn it back on.
Yeah, let me just do it back on. Okay. All right. So, because, okay. So let me see what time it is. Okay, so, okay. Yeah, go ahead. Very good. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Excellent. All right. So right now we have 90 people. That's great. So I'm sure that more people would join us. Definitely it's over 100. Okay, now it is 3:02. I think we can start. We start. And so first of all, hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's a beautiful day today. We choose a nice day. Of course, that's the weather of New York City. I'm not quite sure the weather was like in your area because people coming to this session
There's Amy.
from
Send her a message too.
the different various states. And I don't know people from another country, maybe, because now it's the Zoom, so people can link and from anywhere else as long as there is the internet. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Frank Xu, working for Brooklyn Public Library. Anybody can hear me? Give me a thumb up. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I want communication. Sometimes you keep talking and people say, hey, look, what are you talking? We see your mouse moving. Okay. So welcome to this author and artist talk program. Now, as we know, 80 years ago, 6 million Jews were brutally killed in Holocaust in Europe. Few people survived out of concentration camps. One of the survivors is Fred Terna. He survived out of 4 concentration camps, including Auschwitz. In his words, the survival is a pure luck. Fred is an artist, has maintained an active practicing arts for over 70 years and using the canvas as the means to explore how life and art intersect before, during, and after the Holocaust. His works are included in a variety of collections, including the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Smithsonian Institution, the Albertina collection in Vienna, the Ghetto Fighters Museum in Israel, and the Yad Vashem Museum in Israel as well. Now, Fred's story is fascinating. Now, thanks to Julie Meyer, author of the book, Painting Resilience. I'm going to show you to this. Everybody can see that? Okay, so that's her book. The book is newly released. So thanks to her book, and appeals more to the public. So Julia graduated from the Harvard University, is always searching for fascinating stories and has built a career on asking people to share their stories. Her first book, the young adult novel, Eyes in the Mirror, was published in 2011. So this afternoon, we have the pleasure of meeting both Fred Terna and Julie Meyer and listen to their stories and intergenerational dialogue. So following their talk, and there will be the time for Q&A. So you may send your questions and comments to chat box. So now I give the floor to Julie. So Julia, you go ahead. Mm-hmm. Now it's your time.
Thank you so much, Frank. And thank you to all of you for being here. It's such a pleasure to see some folks that I do know and lots of people that I don't who have joined us this afternoon to hear from Fred and from me. Before I start, I really want to thank Frank and the Brooklyn Public Library for hosting. I have great memories of growing up in the Cortelyou branch of the Brooklyn Public Library. graduating from Little House on the Prairie to the Babysitters Club to Sweet Valley High and Agatha Christie and so many others. So I'm especially excited to be hosted here. I also want to thank Christine Lavin, who put together the video that you saw at the intro and who shared this event with, I'm assuming, many of you who joined us at her recommendation. You can now actually request the book from the library. So if you're interested in learning more, you'll be able to do that on the library's website. And if you want more information after you've heard from me and Fred about the book or about Fred's art more generally, you can also visit my website, which is juliamayer.com. So over the course of this afternoon, you'll hear a few small sections from the book, a little bit from the man himself, Fred Terna, see a couple of his pieces of art, and have a chance to ask some of your questions for both Fred and me. You can feel free to enter your questions in the chat as we go. It's probably easiest to send them to Frank directly at the Brooklyn Public Library account, and he'll help guide us as we get to the Q&A section. So with that, I'd love to start by sharing a little bit of the book with you. One of the questions I always get is how this project got started. So to answer that, just like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, we're going to begin at the beginning, and I'll share a little bit of the introduction with you. Fred Terna has been a fixture at my family's holiday table and at our synagogue on Saturday mornings for most of my life. Growing up, I knew he was a full-time artist, but did not know that he had been painting for more than 60 years. I didn't realize that his work was frequently shown in galleries throughout New York City, either solo or grouped with other post-impressionist artists, or that his work is in many major Holocaust museums around the world, including the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. Fred and his wife of over 30 years, Rebecca, often spend two of our larger family holidays with us, Passover and Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Rebecca commands an audience, while Fred is reserved. My mom maintains that there is an unwritten agreement that if Fred talks, everyone listens. Naturally soft-spoken, with a Central European accent from his native Prague, Fred is sometimes willing and able to tell stories about his past. Other times he's not. It's something he's honest about, and I learned to check when he arrived. Can I ask questions tonight? Are you up for talking tonight?
Yes.
I never needed to clarify that what I really meant was, can I ask you about the Holocaust tonight? Starting when I was a teenager, Fred, then in his 80s, offered to take me on tours of his art studio in Brooklyn. A savvy New York City kid, I had a pretty specific idea of what it meant when an older man asked a teenage girl to tour his studio. After years of asking, he eventually gave up. I was a recent college graduate when it occurred to me to ask Fred if his offer of a tour still stood. He readily agreed. I was living in Boston and working for nonprofits I cared about deeply. I had a serious boyfriend, Brian. Brian's grandfather survived World War II in hiding, and his grandmother had escaped but was the secret keeper of many others' stories that she never shared. I now wear the diamond that his grandfather took into hiding with him during the war, and which he gave to Brian's grandmother when he proposed. My own grandparents fled Germany in 1935 and 1940. Many of those they left behind perished. My grandfather died before I was born, and my grandmother was so overwhelmed by guilt, remorse, and sadness that she kept much of her history to herself. My grandfather, on the other side, was part of a division of the American Army that liberated a concentration camp called Alam. He spoke to me about it only once, but for the rest of his life he said Kaddish, the Jewish prayer for mourning, for those he buried in a mass grave. For Brian, my older brother Jesse, and me, the idea of spending the afternoon with someone who could talk about his experiences was a special one. I scheduled a tour when all three of us would be in Brooklyn. On a brisk sunny day in February 2014, Brian, Jesse, and I managed to find a parking spot right across the street from Fred and Rebecca's four-story Brooklyn brownstone. For all of the Brooklynites on the call, you know what it means to find a parking space right across the street from where you're trying to go. Rebecca, 23 years younger than Fred, was away skiing. Fred welcomed us. In the entryway was a beautiful painting made of short pastel lines on a long, light canvas. I complimented it, and Fred thanked me and told us this was how he remembered one of the mass graves from his time in the camps. Fred walked us through the artwork on his walls and currently in progress in his studio, and gave a short demonstration of how he mixes acrylic paints. One of us asked if we could keep asking questions, and Fred agreed. We sat with him in his studio, a large, bright room on the top floor filled to the brim with art supplies, labeled notebooks of Fred's work, slides, photographs, works in progress, and so much more. We asked questions, and Fred answered. Instead of asking about the war, falsely thinking we knew that story already, we talked about his life afterwards, about living with the trauma he had experienced. With prodding, Fred opened little glimpses into his life, snippets of time after liberation. He also told us an abbreviated story about the night of his liberation, a shocking tale built on coincidence after coincidence that allowed him to survive a night that few would. Fred said that after his liberation, he moved back to Prague, where he had grown up. I couldn't understand it. How does one go from near death in a concentration camp to regular daily life in Prague? I pressed him on it, and he insisted the story wasn't interesting and politely declined to answer my questions. It's in that moment that this book was born. Over the course of working on this book, I came to understand more and more of the symbolism seen throughout Fred's artwork. Personally, I just love his art. You can see Resilience, which is actually the namesake of this book, hanging behind me at home. And as we went through the interview process each day, we would sometimes hit walls where things were too dark for me, for Fred, or for both of us to keep going. I was usually the problem, and we needed a break. Going through Fred's art archive became how we took those breaks together while staying on task. Sometimes we would go into his storage area and pick a piece or a series of pieces that he specifically wanted to show me. Sometimes we would pull something at random. And sometimes I would want to go back to a piece that I felt I suddenly understood better because of what we had just talked about. So with that in mind, I'd like to share a few of Fred's pieces. There are about 24 throughout the book, which is a small sampling of the thousands of pieces that he's created over his lifetime. But I wanted to focus in on just a few, which have some of the most commonly recurring themes of his work. You'll notice that I'm talking about them instead of Fred, because Fred believes that once art is in the world, it's up to the viewer to decide what it means. So he won't really interpret them for you. I'm willing to do that. And so I'll ask if we can put the first slide up, and you'll see the first of the pieces that we're going to look at together. So this piece is one of the earliest works that's still in existence by Fred. It's an India ink drawing that he made while he was held in the concentration camp Terezin, as it's known in Czech, or you may know it as Theresienstadt. It's an image of a mental hospital in the camp. And Fred made it while he was there as a prisoner. At that point, he was using art really as a means of escape, but as a means of having control over something. He'd had control over so little for so long that even just having control over a piece of paper felt like a major improvement. And so he drew what he saw when he could. And these very early works, the ones that still exist, are held by Kibbutz Givat Chaim Ehud, which is a kibbutz in Israel, and some of them by the Ghetto Fighters Museum. Both were incredibly helpful in getting images of the works to me to include in the book. The next piece that we're going to look at is called Face to Face. This was made some 40 years after the work that you just saw in 1984. And it includes a lot of the most common themes that you see in Fred's work. There are circles throughout it, which have many meanings. Sometimes circles in Fred's work can symbolize the womb, They can symbolize community. They can symbolize being surrounded by those that you love. And sometimes they symbolize being unable to get out, having no way to exit your surroundings. You also can see flames here, menorahs, which are a piece of Judaica found both in synagogues and in individuals' homes. And at the bottom, in the black, you can just see a couple embracing, keeping each other safe amidst all going on, and another face that's looking on from the side. In the next piece, this is the only piece we'll look at that's actually not included in the book. We weren't able to get a high quality enough image. Most of the images that you see were taken by Fred's son, who's a photographer, Daniel Terna, an incredibly talented one at that. And we weren't able to get a high quality enough image of this work to include in the book. But I wanted you all to see it, because what you see here is what Fred remembers the mass graves looking like in the camps when the ground started to thaw and the bones started to come up towards the ground. You can see that he's using a lot of different texture in this work. There are little sticks and stones that are included throughout to symbolize what we're looking at. And this is something that really started early when he was in the camps, when he would sometimes do his drawings just on the ground in dirt, something that could be kicked over if a guard walked by and saw what he was doing, something that he could make disappear. And his art is often filled with other textures, sticks and stones being among them. The first time Fred showed me a piece like this, I don't think it was this one, he walked over to it and he raked his fingernails down it. And I was aghast. I couldn't imagine touching a piece of art that way. And he said, yeah, you can't do that in a museum, but I know the quality of my work. I know that I'm not going to hurt it. Here, you can touch it too. And in his home, that's okay. There's in fact so much texture in a lot of his pieces that he did a show just for the blind at one point, because each of the colors in some of his artworks are filled with different textures. So you can make out the whole canvas just by touching it. We're going to shift gears a little bit with the next piece, the orange owl. For a long time, Fred's painting and his artwork was about not just his own mental health, but the mental health of his first wife, Stella, who was also a survivor and who was suicidal for much of their marriage. She needed full-time care. She needed somebody to be home with her all day. And a lot of why Fred became a full-time artist was because it was something he could do from home, where he could keep an eye on Stella, could make sure that she was okay, while creating something that they could sell. The print that you see here was actually done using a mechanism that Fred came up with himself that required 4 hands. So it took both him and Stella working on these pieces together to create the prints. It was absorbing work, and it took them all day to create a print. But at the end of the day, they were both still alive, and they had created something that they could sell. This particular painting, the owl that you see in front of you, I really like because it goes back to a period of time when Fred was doing commercial work. He was at a gallery talking to the gallery owner for a little while, and the owner's daughter was sort of running around, and the gallery owner became distracted, and Fred called the little girl over and said, "What's your favorite animal?" And she said, "Owls." And so he drew her an owl, and she said, "Another one." And so he drew her another one, and she said, "Another one." And by then her dad was back, and was looking over Fred's shoulder and said, "You can't give those to her. We should sell these." And so Fred created a whole show's worth of owls, and the show sold out. So he created a second show's worth of owls, and the show sold out. And the gallery owner asked him to create a third show of owls, and he said, "You know, I'm afraid if I do that, I'm going to become just that guy who paints owls." And so he stopped creating the owls. There are a few of them that still exist. But a lot of his friends came to think that owls were his favorite animal. And so in his and Rebecca's home now, in the dining room, is an entire wall of owl memorabilia given to him by friends. Stuffed owls, pictures of owls, photos of owls. So he did kind of just become that guy who paints owls for a little while before he went back to some of his own themes. And so in the last work, which is called Open Gates, and I'd like to actually read the description of this piece from the book, because I'm afraid that I'll forget some of the things that I want to talk about with it. Walls appear in many of Fred's paintings. Even though they're not always the focal point, they never fully vanish. He explains, "At some point in my work, I put gates in the walls so that you could actually get somewhere. But then the gates started to look like the fences around the camps." Here, Fred paints the Temple Mount, a topic he returns to over and over throughout his career in different ways. In this version, streaming sunlight illuminates darkened archways. The short strokes are similar to the technique he uses in other paintings to create flames, but with this blue and yellow color scheme, they seem joyous instead of sinister. These arches symbolize different things at different times: new beginnings, tombstones, escape routes. This was just a sample of a few of his works. He's also created masks, stained glass for a few different synagogues, and thousands of other paintings and prints. This book is not a complete catalog of his art by any means. It's a way of learning more about his life, and through that, learning more about his artwork. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Fred to join me, and I'll start by asking a few questions before opening it up to everyone else to ask questions as well. Fred, I think trying to interpret your work in front of you is one of the things that makes me most nervous about doing events together. So before anything else, is there anything that you want to go back to of the pieces that we just shared to add anything that I might have missed?
They're just an example of what I've been doing at that particular time. I've been changing and changing. That is, work that I'd done years ago, I would today not do anymore. But to this very day, I paint feelings, attitudes, ideas, and as my mind changes, so does the painting. And the one thing I try to do is to paint a durable painting. Somewhere, things that last are part of my life. That is, I'm trying to preserve something from the past. And the painting is part of it. So my paintings are constructed physically as well as I know how to. And that is, you could sketch them and they'll still be good as new. I could expand on the technology a lot, but that would lead into very, very different area, how to paint physically.
Okay, thank you. You say that your paintings change as your feelings change, as your emotions change. I think the first thing I want to just make note of is it's been quite a couple of weeks in this country and around the world. How are you doing? How are you feeling right now?
Today, January 2021, I feel good again. And of course, you can tell that I'm talking politics. And I'm happy to be able to breathe freely and not to be bound by history. I haven't watched television for the longest time. Before that, I was glued to it. And now I'm relieved of that.
Good. So I think you're along with probably many people who are watching today. Getting back to the book, Fred, can I ask, why did you say yes to me doing this project? Both, why do you say yes to interviews so often, even though I know that they're hard for you? But also, why did you say yes to me doing this larger scale project?
For the longest time, people were asking me to write my book. And I realized that I couldn't really do it. Delving back into the past was at times quite painful. And I did not want to immerse myself into that time. To describe what Auschwitz was like is beyond my words. Others have tried it. Yes, there are books about various concentration camps, and I feel that they've done their share. I don't think that I could add much more than my own personal feelings. When you came along and asked me, why didn't you write a book? I said, well, I really couldn't, but maybe you give it a try. And you graciously accepted it, and I appreciate it very much. You've taken a heavy burden away from me. Yes, it is just a tiny fraction of my life, but an important one for me, and possibly for a few people around me.
Thank you. Well, it was my honor to get to be part of this with you, so thank you. We spent a lot of time together over the course of this, a lot more time than you usually do with your interviewers. What were you most excited to talk about that you don't usually share? Or now that you've read through the final product, what are you most excited to read about that you don't usually share?
Perhaps the endeavor to communicate and being part of the lectures bureau of the Holocaust Memorial Museum here in New York, am asked to speak about this and that. And I feel that is now my main function, when to talk. And the audience tends to be friendly, occasionally quite large. And so I do what the book should have done. But here, when talking to a group, I talk about a tiny bit of this and that. And so that relieves my guilt. I didn't write the book. I'm talking here and there.
Well, you have 125 people at least listening to you now. And I know that usually when you speak in person, you like to find the youngest person in the room and have them stand up and ask them to remember that they've met a survivor today. Now that's something that's a little bit harder on Zoom, though I suppose we could do it eventually. So I'd like to ask a broader question, which is, what do you hope readers will take from your story? What do you hope people will do because they've learned about what you went through?
Perhaps a sum of it at this late date. I've learned how to live with the past and shape a life that makes sense, that somehow satisfies my day-to-day living. That is, I know how the past intrudes, but I've learned how to deal with it. So that perhaps is my lesson. Yes, terrible things can happen in a person's life, but there are ways of dealing with them. No two are alike. I found a particular one, painting and music and friends around me allow me to function as well as I know how to.
Thank you. I could keep going, but I'm sure that there are questions from the audience, and I want to open it up to hear from some more of you. You're welcome to ask questions of me, of Fred, or of both of us. And Frank, I think you'll be moderating that for us.
Yeah.
You can send questions in the chat directly to Frank at the Brooklyn Public Library account or generally. And Frank, if you can tell us what you're seeing, and we're happy to answer some questions.
Thank you, Julia and Fred, for the wonderful stories. And Fred once wrote, "My father's family perished in the camps. My mother and I are a testament to his will to move on, to put a new life together, to look death in the face and prove that life can flourish." So in the years since the war, Fred Terna has honored his pledge to remember and to tell the story of those who perished. So Fred, thank you so much for sharing your experience, story, and memory with a large public so that the history will be remembered as ever. So now it is time for us to see the questions and the comments. Let me first go into the chat box to see what people left over there. And so several people expressed their sincere thanks to Christine Lavin and for the wonderful the music, the video. Christine made this beautiful video. You are seeing now several people, and the other email from the professor Shuming Lu, and wonderful artwork. And one person said, "I'm thoroughly enjoying this amazing book. Thank you, Fred and Julia." Now, by the way, the book, The Painting Resilience, now is available, in the Brooklyn Public Library for you to borrow, and also available to purchase at Amazon.com or directly from the Julia at her website, juliamayer.com. That's JuliaMayer.com. Thank you so much. So let me continue. What else? The questions. And people say, "Thank you so much." And one person say, "Hey, look, does Frank still climb 3 stories to work in his studio?" He said, "Wow, how does he feel, while he's painting?" Okay. Now, actually, he mistakes. Frank is my name. I'm not an artist. That's a Fred. But he thought, "Oh, sorry, mistake," right? He says, "Thumbs up for the Fred." And yeah, I know his name is a Fred and not a Frank. So, and one of the questions for Fred is that, does Fred even suffer from nightmare? So I know, Fred, when you produce and make paintings, does it trigger your painful memory of the past in the concentration camps?
Actually, that's the opposite. When I have bad feelings, nightmares, fears, whatever one carries in one's life, painting is one of the ways I get around it. Not around it, I sort of paint my troubles away. That is in essence some of the paintings. Some of them are happy. Some of them are joyful. There are times when I'm happy. Painting expresses it. There are many, many paintings that are gloomy. They're too dark to be shown on television, but they're there. And painting, and to some extent music, is what keeps me safe, what keeps me sane mentally. Of course, there is my wife, there's our son, the world around me, and that too keeps me in balance. At 97, there are plenty of reasons to complain. I don't. I paint and listen to music.
Thank you. It's a strong character. Now, one person says, "Thank you, Brooklyn Public Library and Julie. This is very special. I grew up on East 89th Street, only 2 doors down from Mr. Terna and his wife, who lived directly upstairs from our great aunt, Margaret. So there is so much I never knew." Okay, so and on, so there is a lot, the message and the left. When did you? Okay, one of the question for Fred again. Question is, when did you start painting, and why?
Well, I started paint right after the war. The moment when I was liberated, a kind soul gave me a piece of paper and some watercolors. That was my continuation of what had been going on through my mind during the war. When I looked at these these were real watercolors, I realized that many of these contained walls, fences, and I realized very quickly that I'm still in the camps. So I said, I've got to stop this. And I painted landscapes. And then looking at these landscapes, after a while it dawned on me, what was I doing? What was I painting? Again, fenced in areas. So I said, well, I've got to stop that. And just branched out, slowly exploring ways of expressing myself pictorially, color, and very much with surface. The surface that Julia mentioned as being very important, things we can touch. So many of my paintings contain tactile material. We live by touch for a long, long time. A baby lives by touch very early on. And to me, touch is a sign of friendliness. Things we can touch, we can be friendly with.
Great. Now, the next question is for Julia. So he said, Julia, you mentioned some recurring themes, the circle, gates, doors. Can you talk about others, please? That's a question from the Andrew.
Absolutely, and that question may be better, maybe this is one Fred and I can share. Certainly circles, I think, are something that you see over and over. There's a lot of Judaic themes, Jewish themes in Fred's work, biblical themes. One of the particular stories that he looks at over and over is the binding of Isaac, which was when Abraham took his son Isaac to be sacrificed to God and was stopped just before he could by an angel's intervention and given a ram to sacrifice instead. That story is actually a very commonly discussed one by Holocaust survivors because it asks questions about why bad things happen to good people. And it asks questions about why life has to be so hard, why God tests us this way. And I think that's another major theme that you see in Fred's work. Fred, are there any other themes that you would add that I haven't talked about yet? Most common ones?
It's, at one time I was in a spiritual rut of sorts, and I painted execution walls. Mm. And after a while, I realized there are other walls in my memory, and the wall in Jerusalem came up. So I painted a sort of modern version of it, and so that was a good theme. And then I wondered what happened after the walls, or while the walls were still in existence, and I painted imaginary structures above the wall. We know now what it looks like, but mine was pure fantasy idea. So I kept working on that. Eventually, I painted gates into the wall. So I went from the execution wall to the idea of a temple that can be entered. That was a spiritual change, a pictorial change. But you've got to see the paintings. And there are many, many of these. And the paintings behind you is sort of the spirits arising out of that. That's another theme, that is light coming out of fire. I painted fire. I painted several paintings on fire, essentially memories of the crematorium in Auschwitz. So flames coming out of darkness is one of the themes that I come back to, in a way reliving it but getting rid of the memory at the same time. So painting is allowing me to deal with all the entire range of my feelings. And I'm very grateful to have the ability and to some degree the skill to do it.
Thank you. Now, one of the audience asked a question very simple. I think I can answer on behalf of Julia. What is the name of the book? Now, I have the book in my hand. Painting Resilience, the Life and the Art of Fred Terna. So that's exactly the title of the book. Now, the next question, seems like lots of people are curious and of great interest, okay? So questions one after another. One of the questions says, regarding the early ink drawing, where did the material come from? And did anyone try to stop you? Question for Fred.
Am I still on?
Yeah.
This voice.
Fred, yeah.
Yes. I paint because of the inner need. It is my way of living, of functioning, and painting is one thing that I do. First thing in the morning I do is go back to my studio and paint or do some fuss around the studio. Not all painting is putting a brush on the canvas. A lot of it is just physical work for mixing my own paints, and I do not buy tubes. I mix my own material. Somewhere there should be a slide available to you showing you the jars with dry pigments, and I mix my pigments with acrylic, by large acrylic, and I use materials to mix into it that allows me to insert textures.
Fred, I think that question was about the work that you created in Terezin. Do you mind would you like to talk about that, or would you like me to talk a little bit about how you came to have the materials for that?
Well, finding materials in Terezin was comparatively easy. That is, paper was still available in various forms. In Terezin was one area that had been set up by the Nazis as their propaganda space to make posters, to make materials, signs, and these people had access to art supplies. And I had some connection to it. And so paper was, of course, stolen wherever possible, absconded, no scrap of paper was thrown away. And that is where I found the materials in Terezin. Now, all of this, all my work that I made then was lost when I was shipped to Auschwitz. I had put it into a box and gave that box for somebody to take care of. That person too was shipped to Auschwitz and handed it to somebody else. I don't know what happened to that work. By some sheer chance, 4 items survived and wound up in Kibbutz Givat Chaim Ichud in Israel after the war. And I didn't know about it until my wife Rebecca and I went to visit that kibbutz, asked how you would find things. And they said, well, we really don't know, but we've got a few things here that we cannot identify. These 4 were part of it.
Fred, several attendees are interested in knowing the paintings next to you on your side or maybe behind you. And can you speak about it?
It's one of the paintings I'm working on right now. I don't know whether you can see it. Oh yes, it is colorful on the top and darker farther down. So out of darkness comes light. And now it shows a lot of textures. I can't really move that thing properly. I'm not good at that kind of photography, but you may get the general idea. And I've set this up as well as I know to. Well, I'm a painter, not a display person. And yes, it's stuck there. Let me do something that Julia mentioned. Don't do that in a museum. They don't like it. But if you look at the painting close by, you won't see a thing because it's well constructed physically.
Fred, do you do painting every day? Is it like exercise, therapy, practice, meditation? That's the one question from the audience.
I try to paint every day. There are days when I'm 97 years old, so my physical condition doesn't occasionally allow it. And then, if you know any 97-year-old, same list applies to me. But I paint as much as I can. Usually after 3-4 hours of painting, I'm pretty much exhausted. So what I do in between, I listen to music, I try to take care of my daily life. That is, what I'm trying to do is live as normal a life as I know, as my body allows it. Very fortunately, I'm still able to take care of myself.
Next question is a little bit like philosophical. It can be for Julia and Fred. Can art save humankind from its inhumanity?
Fred, I think you should take that one.
Oh dear. But obviously, the sense of life, the purpose of life, is very much on my mind. Somewhere, the moving sort of the core of my feelings has to do with the Shoah. That is the engine that pushes everything. So very much arises in my mind, how does one deal with it? How come? And yes, I have looked at it politically. I was involved politically to the extent that I can. I was very, very good here locally for school crossing guards and school buses, but I feel I should be in politics beyond that measure, and I am spiritually, but not physically. That is, I'm not in politics. I have no intention of being in politics. However, the public life is the very core of our existence, not just mine. How do we, people at large, handle ourselves in a community to make it a fair, just, and open world? And I think that's a full-time job, and spiritually I'm moving by that idea. What is it that makes us a fair, open, and just community? I know, and we've had experience in recent years, of what it should not be. And obviously, the Shoah was one of the areas where I've not discovered, observed humanity at its worst. The question of what is it that makes people who otherwise are civilized to behave the way they did. And that is not something that happened only then. That is happening to this day. And it's very much on my mind, and I don't know how to handle it. My way around it is painting and music and being involved. So when I come to speaking in public, people ask me, what should you do? Or should we do? I say, be involved. Just don't stand by. Be part of it. put your mind to it. Live and act and participate in the community so that we would achieve that civilized, open, just community.
One professor from Brooklyn College says that I will share Julie's website with my students at Brooklyn College. That's the message from the professor Lu Suming. Okay, so Julia, can you post your website in the Dropbox? Yeah, so that they could share with you. Now, one question for Fred. People ask, where can they buy your paintings, one of your paintings? Is that possible?
Go write my name, Fred Terna, and somewhere our son, who is a photographer, who knows how to do these things, he handles my artwork. He will guide you. Yes, these things are for sale, and that's why I paint. I want them to go out into the world. How do I know how to go into the world? No, I'm the world's worst art manager. Very fortunately, our son knows how to handle these things. And yes, they are for sale. Yes, they can be found if you go by my name and find out more about it. That's why I do it.
I also put the link, the email address for Fred's son Daniel in the chat window for anybody who's looking for it.
Thanks. Great. And one patron asks about this, the concentration camps. Well, the question is, how do you think your time in the concentration camp affected your painting? Now, Julia has touched on this, but what are your thoughts?
You're talking to me?
Yeah, that seems like a question for you.
Even there, it was important to behave in a humane way. And in the concentration camp, and I don't have to tell you about the guards, but I was fortunate to be in a group that came from Prague Jewish community. We lived a certain way. We said, good morning, and how are you? We used civilized language. That is our strength, surviving concentration camps to the extent that it was physically feasible, an accident, but by remaining humane, by adhering to the ethics and behavior that we were used to. That gave us strength. We knew how to behave. That is, in spite of what we occasionally hear, behavior in the concentration camp, and here I'm talking primarily Terezin and Auschwitz soon thereafter, we behaved humanely, and I think who we were, and the internal ethics, the knowledge what civilized life was supposed to be, kept us going. There was no criminality among inmates. Yes, we wore striped images, striped pajamas. Some of us were very, very learned people, some simple people, but the behavior was uniformly humane and civilized.
Great. Now, Fred, it seems like many people keep, sending the questions to the box, but due to the time limit, now I'm going to just convey last question to you, from the several people. That is also my question. The question is, do you believe in God?
If you can give me a good definition of God, I may be able to answer.
That's the answer already to the question. Great. Thank you so much. The time is, passing very quickly. It's a time to close the session. Now, to conclude, let me quote Fred's words. And he said, the sure Holocaust is like a crazy bass that is playing all the time. I have learned to play the fiddle above it so that there should be some harmony to my life. Painting is one of my fiddles. Thank you to both Fred and Julia for your wonderful stories that entertain the audience. Now again, the book is available in Brooklyn Public Library to borrow and to be purchased at Amazon.com or directly from the Julia's website, juliemeyer.com. And I know so many people have so many questions as I'm browsing through the message in the chat box. Lots of people give very, very nice, sweet comments. It's a great program. It's a great event. Many people will say, I really, really have a good time. I enjoy it so much beyond my expectation. And one person said, a very uplifting talk. Thanks to Fred Terna, Julie Meyer, and me, Frank Xu. So do you have any words from Julia, Fred, the final words?
Thank you for listening to Julia and to me and to you, Frank.
And I will echo that, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and Frank, for your enthusiasm for sharing this work with the community. I'm so grateful to have been able to spend this time with all of you. So thank you.
Again, thank you for your time and coming to support the program and services of Brooklyn Public Library. Take care, everybody, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Just so funny.
For people who are still on, I'm finding out that my kindergarten teacher is here. Mrs. Saffron, hi.
Oh, wow.
Everyone's just concerned.
Hi, Julia. Hi, honey. How are you?
Hi. I'm so happy to hear from you.
Oh, you see.
I'm busting my buttons. I cannot believe how wonderful you are. But I knew it. I'm not surprised. I wish you a lot of luck. It's so wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Of course. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Thank you so much to everybody. It's great. It's a great afternoon. Seems like people are not willing to leave immediately.
This part is afterwards.
Julie, maybe think of another one.
Hi, this is Clara Chu, and I'm right now involved with Agnes Kaposi, who is also a Holocaust survivor and has published her biography last year. And so I'm just wondering what would be the best way to maybe reach at least one of you, and then you can contact me with others if they're interested in maybe following up and doing some kind of programming.
So if you're thinking about library programming, I would say, Frank, probably you're the person to reach out to. If you're thinking about joint programming with me, which I would be absolutely open to, there's a form on my website, which is juliameyer.com, to contact me, and that's an easy way to get in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you could also, call the library, the Brooklyn Public Library, and to make a suggestion or recommendation, right? So they will pass your message and suggestion to the related department, right, for contacting.
Okay, thank you so much.
It was playing in the background.
Great.
Folks, you're welcome to reach out to me through the website if you'd like to ask follow-up questions as well. But I think for the moment, we'll call it an afternoon and say thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. It's great. Yeah.